Jake Maddox had spent so many years alone on his ranch that even the walls of his cabin seemed to have forgotten the sound of another human voice. The place sat on a stretch of desert land so wide and empty it could swallow a man whole if he stepped outside at night without a lantern. Jake liked it that way, or at least that's what he always told himself. At sunrise, he'd push open the creaking screen door, take a seat on his porch, and watch the desert wake up. Coyotes slunk back to their dens. Jackrabbits darted cautiously between sagebrush, and the sun spilled over the horizon like a slow golden spill of molasses. Jake would sip his coffee strong, enough to kick a bull square in the jaw and stroke his old Mustang, Dusty, who'd nuzzle his shoulder like an overgrown dog. Most days looked the same. Fix a fence post, mend a saddle, check the cattle, talk to nobody but the wind. And though he never admitted it out loud, the wind was starting to answer him back. That's what happens when a man spends too long with nothing but quiet for company. Folks in town called him Ghost Rider because he moved like a shadow. No one noticed until he was already gone. Some said he preferred it that way. Others whispered that he'd been broken long ago by war, by love, or by something too private for gossip to untangle. Whatever the truth, Jake didn't correct any of them. Silence was easier. But on this particular evening, one of those dusky, copper-colored ones where the air feels heavy with unspoken things, Jake felt something shift. It wasn't dramatic, just a prickle at the back of his neck. The kind a man gets when the desert is about to deliver more than wind and dust. He was sitting on the porch, sharpening his old pocket knife, when he felt the boards beneath his boots tremble ever so slightly. Dusty lifted his head, ears twitching. Jake paused, listening. The wind carried no warning, no thunder, no distant engine. Just hoofbeats. Slow, steady, unmistakable. No one rode out here. Not for miles. Jake set the knife down and stood, one hand instinctively drifting to the worn handle of the rifle propped against the wall. The hoofbeats grew closer, 5 riders at least, judging by the rhythm. In a place where nothing ever happened, something was happening. And whatever it was headed straight for him. As the hoofbeats drew nearer, Jake stepped off the porch, planting his boots firmly in the dust. The last time riders approached his land without warning, it had been trouble. But this felt different. The dusk light deepened, painting the desert in hues of rust and ember. Out of that deepening glow emerged 5 figures on horseback, silent, deliberate, dignified. They rode in a single line, not rushed, not afraid, but with a quiet purpose that unsettled the stillness of the evening. Their long skirts brushed the sides of their horses. Their hair, braided with beads and feathers, caught the dying sunlight. Jake recognized Apache dress immediately. He'd lived around these lands long enough to know their look, their posture, their strength. As the riders slowed, their horses exhaled clouds of warm breath into the cooling air. The woman at the front, straight-backed and calm as a mountain, guided her horse, forward and dismounted with the kind of practiced grace Jake had rarely seen. She stood before him, tall and steady, eyes dark as obsidian stone. "I'm Nichia," she said, her voice steady but heavy with fatigue. "These women are my sisters in grieving." Jake felt the tension bleed out of his shoulders, replaced with a different kind of alertness, respect mixed with concern. Nichia continued, "A wildfire swept through our village. The flames devoured homes faster than water could be brought. Many lost everything, some lost more than that." The other 4 widows dismounted quietly, each carrying only what could fit in small bundles, woven blankets, a few tools and memories too painful to speak of. Their faces told stories Jake didn't dare ask about, stories of husbands gone to the flames, of smoke stealing not just shelter but futures. "We seek shelter," Nichia said simply. "Not forever, just until the rebuilding begins. Your ranch, it has room, and land unclaimed by crops or animals. We will work. We will stay out of your way." Jake swallowed hard. It wasn't often that people came to him with need. Folks assumed he wanted to be left alone. Truth was, sometimes he wished somebody, anybody, would knock on his door just so he'd remember how to talk. He looked at the 5 women, their backs straight, but their eyes tired from loss and miles of riding. "You rode a long way to ask," Jake said quietly, "and it'd be a cold-hearted fool to turn anyone away after a fire." Nichea nodded once, a small but profound gesture of gratitude. "You can stay," Jake said finally. "All of you." For the first time in years, the ranch didn't feel empty. It felt like it was waiting for something new to begin. Jake Maddox had lived a long time with nothing but silence for company. So the sudden presence of 5 Apache widows turned his quiet ranch upside down in ways he never expected. It started the very first morning. He woke to the sound of soft singing, gentle harmonies drifting through the open window like wind-borne lullabies. For a moment he thought he was dreaming. He hadn't heard a woman's voice in his home in over a decade. When he stepped outside, blinking against the early sun, he found the widows already at work. 2 were tending to the horses with a precision that put Jake's own habits to shame. Another was sweeping the porch, boards with a woven broom improvised from desert brush. Nichea and the youngest widow, Tessa, had commandeered his tiny kitchen and were cooking something that smelled like roasted corn mixed with desert herbs. Jake rubbed his eyes, baffled. You don't have to do all that." Nichea gave him a look, not unkind but firm. "A place that shelters us should not suffer for it." And that was that. Suddenly Jake's ranch was alive with movement. The widows moved about like a well-practiced team, their steps light but purposeful. They fixed the loose hinges on the barn, oiled his saddles, and even organized his tool shed. Something Jake secretly resented until he realized he could finally find everything. But the most surprising change was the laughter. One afternoon, as Jake repaired a fence post, he heard Tessa let out a burst of laughter, sharp, enough to startle the birds from the mesquite trees. The older widow, Sunny, had told a joke in Apache. Jake didn't understand the words, but the joy in their voices warmed something deep in him that had long gone cold. Then came the cooking. Jake had survived on beans, jerky, and coffee for so long he barely remembered what real flavor was. But the widows prepared meals with spices he couldn't pronounce, wild onions roasted with chili, blue corn cakes, rabbit stew thickened with herbs gathered from the chaparral. Every meal was a reminder of cultures older than his ranch, older than the town, older than his memories. The evenings were the biggest change of all. Jake used to sit by his fire alone, sharpening knives or reading old ranch ledgers. But now the widows built a communal fire outside, where they sang ancient songs under the stars. Jake didn't join at first. He lingered on the porch, watching from the shadows. But the music wrapped around him like warmth on a cold night. Slowly he found himself stepping closer, listening, learning. The solitude he once embraced now felt like a distant habit, fading with each shared meal, each quiet conversation, each echo of laughter drifting across the ranch yard. For the first time in years, Jake wondered if loneliness had been a choice he didn't need to keep making. The weeks passed in a rhythm so natural that Jake almost forgot it hadn't always been this way. Days were filled with work, laughter, shared meals, and the steady hum of life threading itself through every corner of the ranch. But time, like the desert wind, never stays still. And one crisp morning, Nichea approached Jake with the quiet resolve of someone bracing for change. "The rebuilding is finished," she said. Jake froze mid-saddle buckle. He had known this moment would come, had counted the days without admitting it, but hearing the words hit him harder than he expected. He looked toward the horizon, where faint wisps of smoke rose from the newly restored village. It was a good thing, a hopeful thing, but it meant the widows would return home. It meant the ranch would go silent again. "When do you leave?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Tomorrow at sunrise." The rest of the day moved strangely. The widows went about gathering their things, folding blankets and wrapping tools with practiced efficiency. Jake found himself hovering nearby, offering help they didn't need, pretending to fix things he'd already fixed twice last week. He wasn't sure what unsettled him more, the coming emptiness or the fact that he'd grown used to their presence so quickly. That evening, they all gathered around the communal fire one last time. The flames flickered against their faces, casting warm light over expressions both grateful and bittersweet. The widows sang one final song, this one softer than usual, A farewell carried on gentle notes that drifted over the desert like smoke. Jake sat closer to them than he ever had before. When the song ended, Nichea turned to him. "You gave us shelter when we had nothing," she said. "A warrior's heart does not always show itself in battle. Sometimes it shows in how a man opens his door." Jake swallowed hard. Compliments were like cactus needles to him, sharp, unexpected, unsettling. Well, any decent man would have done the same. "No," Sonny said quietly. "Not any man." Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like acknowledgement, like understanding. The next morning came too quickly. The widows mounted their horses, their figures framed by the rising sun. Before they rode off, Nichea paused and looked back. "Your ranch isn't empty," she said. "Not anymore. We will return. Friends return." And true to her word, they did. Not every day, not even every week, but often enough that the ranch never felt ghostly again. As their silhouettes faded into the horizon, Jake stood on his porch and realized something he never expected. His solitude hadn't been taken from him. It had been filled.